Well, first of all, I can't prove it to you. I put that in the title so you would come and listen to me, but you can prove it to you. That I promise you. You can prove to yourself, that the physical sense of separation and deficiency or lack comes from emotional repression. And I know some of you may be thinking, oh my God, you say everything does. I'm turning it off. Stop. Hold on. Because I'm not here to try to prove it to you. I promise you I'm not. Because there's nothing in that for me. When people either agree or disagree, it's flat for me because I'm looking for resonance. It's a different thing. And I think that's what you're looking for. Agreeing and disagreeing can be kind of safe, but when there's resonance and curiosity, then you'll go look for yourself. When there's an openness to hear it, even if you disagree with some of it, if on some level you resonate with this, you'll go investigate it yourself. And I'm going to show you how to. But the sense of physical separation and deficiency comes from emotional repression. Just hear me out. So, first, the sense of deficiency is probably easier to grasp with the conscious mind. Why that's connected to repression. When we are kids, if we cannot feel and express something, we have to store it. But repression means we store it unconsciously. We don't know that we're doing it. So we grew up, all of us, if we have unconscious parents, with buried anger or buried hurt. Some emotion or emotions were predominantly buried unconsciously, and we don't know that. And so as adults, then, we have identities that come from that. And those identities are there to keep us safe from that. But we may not know that. And we feel emotions that are safer than what we've buried. And all that stuff that we're identifying with is safer than what we've buried. That's why it's arising. As science says, emotional repression produces suffering. But the sense of deficiency then comes because we are lacking or deficient in the emotions that we buried. So we're missing parts of ourselves. We can't and do not experience the authentic self, whatever that is, growing up. So of course we look for ourselves, but also we identify with a false self because that false self is, I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. You see the sense of deficiency or lacking, like there's something wrong with me. That's what the mind does with the feeling of deficiency, the emotional deficiency. So basically, it is emotional deficiency, that sense of lack lack or deficiency. We've buried these emotions. You can't get there. That's as close as you can get with your conscious mind to understand that we are lacking something, that you should trust the sense of deficiency, because if you inquire skillfully with that, you make the repression conscious that creates that, and the sense of lack or deficiency goes away. But if you don't know that, you might just sit in awareness and feel that sense of deficiency or lack and just rest with it. Not being interested in the unconscious programming of repression that creates it. Or not knowing how to get to that. So I'm inviting you to see that for yourself. The sense of deficiency or lack comes from repression. The sense of deficiency or lack is also, as I've said recently in videos, I repeat things for a reason. The sense of deficiency or lack is connected to the sense of separation. And we can trust that in our own experience. You don't need me to tell you that. Just feel into your own body what it's like to be you. A sense that you're separate from the table, from other people, a sense of physical separation, and a sense of lack or deficiency, like there's something wrong with me. Like I'm not whole and complete. That's the suffering. So you can trust that yourself, that feeling of lack or deficiency is somehow connected to that sense of separation. But to get to the seeing that the sense of separation itself is coming in large part from emotional repression, you'll have to just trust me here on something and hear this out. I know this through reverse engineering, through embodiment, the way that my experience feels like is the way that I think it should have felt like as a kid who grew up in a conscious world, who didn't have to store emotions. So I experience that and I go, okay, what happened in my life? And I look back, and what I see it happen with everybody I'm working with is that it just didn't feel safe to feel certain things, and we buried those and we didn't know we did it. That's what repression is. And so when you keep doing that, see, repression is a mechanism that happens in every moment. So once our system learns to hold something back, it just continues doing that constantly. It's a mechanism. When we keep burying anger because we're afraid of anger or afraid of hurt or sadness, then we have fear, anger, hurt, sadness, and the shame that goes with all that buried in the body, continuously being stored in the body. And over time, that creates that physical sense of separation. Because there's also programming with that buried emotion that's self-protective, so that we respond and react from that repression to stay safe from feeling and expressing that. And that you can't know probably with your mind, but it might make sense. But I mean, the only way to know that is through direct experience. That's how I'm saying reverse engineer, because I bypassed repression. Then when I went to the repression, I saw that that was the root of all the suffering, and I had missed that. And then that last bit of separation that was, for me, in my spine, as I've said, the chronic pain had a sense of separation and subtle sense of deficiency in it. The chronic pain did. But then as it left, that sense of separation and deficiency that was there, which was that was all that was there in my body, left. So now, having experienced the embodiment that I was deprived of by holding anger back, I can report to you that at least on this path, what we've discovered, or what I've discovered, is the sense of separation and deficiencies coming from emotional repression, which makes a lot of sense if you look at the science. They say emotional repression creates a lot of our suffering, our physical diseases, persistent physical diseases. It gives us a premature death rate, has an effect on the physicality of being human. It is the physicality of being human. Our emotional system and our immune system, according to science, mirror each other. Things are not as they appear. And so I want to leave you with the being, talking about being. Because in this reverse engineer, being gets embodied. I mean, it got embodied for me. And so I can speak from it and say this, that being must include being in relationship and being authentic, or else it's not being. Well, it's being plus repression and trauma. It's being. But I think it's the mind that just says it's black and white, like we're awake or we're not, or we recognize being or not. There are different qualities to being, depending on the embodiment of it. This is Eckhart Tolle's 3 frequencies of being. You can phrase it differently for yourself, but there's different qualities based on how deep the awareness is brought into the core programming that creates the sense of separation and deficiency in the body. As Eckhart says, if the pain body continues, that plays into the sense of separation. What my version of that, he's saying, if the repression continues, the sense of separation continues. And that's why we call it that, so we can give you a pathway to that. So being has different qualities if we really trust our experience and get out of the mind and experience what it's like to experience being in our daily lives, moment by moment. Then things like pain and contraction and everything become relevant. Because to be is to allow also. And if we have pain or contraction, we're not allowing, or if we have suffering, there's something that we're not allowing, generally, because that's what repression is holding something back, not allowing it. But with repression, we don't know we're doing it. It's totally buried. So being often includes like contraction there. We're getting back to that sense of physical separation and deficiency that persists in being for people. And that's as simple as coming down into your body right now and feeling the tightness that's there in being, or the contraction or pain or other discomfort that's at the like really base level. And that is where we work with this work, at that level of the sense of physical separation and deficiency. But people don't know that because we call it repression, right? I'm calling it repression, but it is the sense of separation and deficiency. It just took me a while to explain that, because when we first came out, I was just focused on explaining the work to you all. I wasn't focused on making sure that you understood that it was a non-dual embodiment approach. For those of you on YouTube who come to me for that, and I apologize for not being able to articulate it, but I wasn't focused on really convincing anyone of that. I was actually trying to show people that repression is the root of suffering. I just wasn't focused on the awakening thing as much. But I've come back to it, as you guys can see on YouTube, because it's my experience. Being is my experience. Why wouldn't I? But it's embodied. So I think it just took me a while to come back to this. I'm going to sit with you all more in being and just talk about the different qualities of being and why your experience is this way or that way, and how to get to that, or what it takes. And I'm going to talk to you about being in relationship and how you can't be yourself. And I want to talk to you about self, and how if you're not careful, you might go looking for self or want to find that there's no self, but then you're still struggling or suffering. So I want to talk to you about all that. I want to talk to you about how suffering is your best indicator. It isn't even your quality of being when you're sitting here with me, because, I'm talking in a kind of a meditative voice, or just not really agitated sometimes maybe. But if I'm just pointing to being, and you don't have your wife around or anyone, then it might be easy to just sit here, be, and notice being. No, we want to go much deeper than that. If we make it about that, you'll just keep coming back, like many people do, to teachers, and just sit and regulate their nervous systems in being. The tools that I'm showing you give you the embodied being in your life and in your relationship, and show you what your authenticity looks like, which has nothing to do with the self, nothing to do with the self that's separate. The feeling of separation and deficiency comes from repression, remember. So when you get to repression, now you're talking about presence and your own authenticity. Remember that the repression creates the ego identity in the story to stay safe from what's buried. So that's eventually going to go away. All the ego identity that's false for you will go away naturally, not because you try to get it to go away, but because you add stuff into awareness. Remember, you're making the unconscious conscious. So we're not trying to get things to go away. And when you take that approach in being, that you're suffering, you're creating it. Remember, unconsciously creating suffering, then resting in being and allowing it. Unconsciously creating it, consciously allowing it and being is not, you don't want to just leave it at that. You want to get to the root of suffering where you're creating it. When suffering arises, you go to the repression, the root of the suffering. There's the embodied being. It's a process, but embodied being is what you want. Being in relationship, in life, not just here. So we've got a retreat coming up in May. It's online. We want you guys to come, especially if you haven't really started this work or you have trouble understanding how to do it. We're going to lay it all out for you, including experiential. So that's in May. I'm going to put the link for that below here somewhere with this video. And also, if you haven't started this work, you can start now by going and taking the free repression test. It's at the bottom of Kiloby Center. Excuse me. I just said Kiloby Center. No, Kiloby.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and there's a free repression test right there. Thank you.